Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Human Rights Magazine. My guest in this episode of the Pathways to Peace series is Agnes Callamard, the well-known human rights expert who is now Secretary General of Amnesty International. She's had many roles, including that of UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions from 2017 to 2021. To begin our conversation, since the theme of this series is peace, I asked her thoughts about conflict.
There are new conflicts, there are many old conflicts. The vast majority, unfortunately, of the conflicts are protracted. There is rarely an end to them, or they come back. That is the reality of the environment right now. There are an increased number of so-called international internal conflicts, and very few of them right now are getting towards a peaceful, quick resolution. Something that I have observed as a human rights activist, something that I have found working with Amnesty International over the last almost 10 months now. The other thing I can say about conflict is that over the last year or so, the lack of global interest in bringing the COVID-19 pandemic to an end has meant that in many countries of the world, the drivers for conflict have been fed and watered, I will say, whether it's rising poverty, food insecurity, repression or instrumentalization of government by government of COVID. So all of that is creating, I would say, the ground, the fertile ground for future conflict. And I'm not talking about very far away conflict. That's certainly something that we have noticed at Amnesty International. The proliferation of third-party intervention, proliferation of non-state actors involved in conflict. There have been a few interstate conflicts, but they remain the minority. Most of them are the kind I've just described. They are internal, but with an international dimension. That is the reality of our environment, and the multiplication of human rights violations in the context of those conflicts.
There has been some discussion in this podcast series about failure of governments to protect human rights and the social order. Do you agree that there's been a failure of government?
If we are talking about the last decade, and certainly the last few years, then yes, the human rights situation around the world is deteriorating largely because governments are failing to take the necessary actions. And I've just given you the example of COVID, which is a typical example of how, as an international community, states who can do something, who can protect rights because of their influence or money, fail to do so and are planting the seeds for greater instability. I've mentioned the fact that domestically, the vast majority of countries around the world have instrumentalized the pandemic to curtail freedom of expression and protest. We at Amnesty International have just done a quick survey, in fact, of how governments have failed in terms of the protecting of the States. And what we have found is that the majority of the countries have adopted laws that curtail freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and so on, in ways that are violating international law. Freedom of the media is being under attack either because of government censorship or because of the monopoly practice of some media owners who tend to grab different media outlets or different forms of media. So the diversity of the media is certainly at stake here at the moment. Right to health, I've already mentioned, in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, governments have withdrawn from investing into public health. And that has now implications for our inability to address the pandemic, or did certainly until very recently. I mean, these are just a few examples, but at a principal level, at a meta level, human rights protection has decreased. The capacity or the willingness of states to respect rights has decreased. And I think that is an outcome that you can probably conclude is global. So yes, I will agree with your previous speakers on their assessment. In fact, in my view, the situation is so alarming that I have compared it to the 1930s in the previous century. And I've said, in fact, I'm not the only one to have said so, by the way, that we seem to be moving steadily towards an ending. And I don't know whether we will have the capacity, the willingness, or the institution to avoid falling into it. My hope is that we can move around it. My hope is that we will not see a repeat of the 1930 generation. My hope is that we will be more like a 1948 generation, the one that came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But, I think right now, the journey doesn't look very good in terms of the direction.
How do we respond? How can a response be developed? Can there be a response within the international institutions, within the UN system, the financial institutions, or is there a role for corporations? And finally, really, where do we fit as citizens?
The key role here is for us, the people, citizen or not citizen. Because if we don't do something, who will? So I am, I'm personally optimistic in my belief in people. I think they are terrible individuals, human beings, and they are certainly very worrying organized groups at the moment. But at heart, I like to think that if given a choice or if given a space, people will make, will go for the option that have dignity and human rights. I'm hopeful when I see people getting organized, when I see young people demonstrating, when I see young people as young as 12, 13 protesting against climate justice. I'm hopeful when I see how brave the people of Myanmar or Iraq or Sudan are when they march and confront armed soldiers who do not hesitate to shoot and to arrest. So I'm very hopeful in the courage that there is within our every society. I'm hopeful too when I see the imagination and the creativity that people put into responding to the repression or to organize themselves, how they use the environment, the social media, and every tool at their disposal to dream a better world. I think that there are also people within the private sector and who can and will be working alongside civil society. I know, for instance, that our colleagues at Oxfam have just released a very important report on inequality, and they have received support from ultra-rich individuals who have said, we want to pay taxes, we want to be on the right side, we don't want to be escaping our responsibilities, including fiscal and financial. So there are people like that. There are people in the private sector who knows that we cannot be continuing that endless search for profit and greed, that shareholders cannot be determining public policies, that there need to be far more to our position on climate change and our position on China, our position on other matters than those being imposed by corporate actors and their shareholders. There is a realization of that within the private sector. There is a realization that we need to work with a strong state, able to mitigate the negative impact of the liberal market economy right now and the instability, the insecurity that it has created for many people around the world. I think there is increasing realization that we as societies must find ways of embedding a universal income of certain social protection within our society as a way of protecting against the worst impact of globalization, COVID, and whatever, artificial intelligence, robotics, and the move towards a different kind of economy, a green economy. All of that needs to be taken into account, and for that we need to have, public policy that are centered on the human, that are centered on their rights, and that are prepared to invest to mitigate the worst applications of our system. So I am hopeful that there is a great deal of energy to build a better path. There is also a great deal of energy to force the world into further conflict, armament trades, economic models that are putting all of the focus on what shareholders can get, desindustrialization, delocalization, increasing food poverty, water scarcity. So, we have a lot to do in order to respond to those very powerful individual forces that are pushing us in the wrong direction.
Well, thank you very much for taking time to speak with me today. Was there anything else you wish to add before we close up?
Maybe the only thing I would add is for people to to rise up to the challenge. We're not powerless vis-a-vis corporate actors. We're not powerless vis-a-vis historical forces related to climate change. We can change that. We can shift it. We can mitigate it. We can demand better protection and better rights. It's with us to do that. It's with us to take action, to speak up in public meetings on social media. We can speak up against racism. We can speak up against anti-Semitism, against Islamophobia. We can, we have that capacity still in us in many societies, not all. In some places, to speak up will get you to jail or worse. But where we can do that safely, then we have no excuse for not doing it, because there are too many people around the world who can't. And it is incumbent upon us who have that capacity, who have the means, who have the resources to stand up, to speak up, and to defend.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Human Rights Magazine. The podcast is brought to you by the Upstream Journal. I invite you to consider supporting the program and the magazine with a contribution through PayPal as you explore other episodes.